It's Monday, 7:01 a.m., and the wheels of a suitcase scream against the cement like a bad splice on old tape. I'm hunched over my workbench with a 1999 recording in my headphones. Hiss, pop, a low hum at 60 hertz when a voice cuts through the open door. Morning, I'm Noah James. I look up. Sunlight ricochets off the convex bus mirror. I've bolted to the porch post, the one I keep for stupid sentimental reasons, and throws a warped oval of the street onto my floorboards. He's standing there with a blue carry-on and a set of keys still looped on the realtor's tag. His face is too bright in the morning glare. The first thing I see is the line of his nose. Straight, stubborn, Grant, my father's before it was mine. Grant knows, I mutter stupidly before I can stop myself. He smiles like he heard a joke he's not sure he should laugh at. I'm Noah, he repeats. 25. Just moving in. The smell of new paint drifts from the unit next door, sweet and dizzying. Metal scrapes. The edge of his suitcase smacks the step. My phone is suddenly heavy in my palm, too big for my fingers. A hard blade of light slices the tile in my entryway, a bright white fault line. I should say something normal. Welcome, careful with the step, trash pickup is Wednesday. But my mouth has gone dry in the way it does when I'm about to press play on an interview that might ruin someone. Welcome to Cedar Alley, Noah, I manage, aiming for breezy and landing somewhere near breathless. He glances past me into the workshop, the reel-to-reel, the stack of cassettes with masking tape labels. The waveform frozen mid-noise on my monitor. You're Aurelia, right? Mrs. Park told me you do audio restoration? Forensic audio, I say, automatic. I clean what people don't want to hear. A breeze snakes through the doorway and flips the corner of an old manila envelope propped by habit near the mail tray. It's the deposit box packet I never file anywhere else, marked with a fading stamp. Locker 17. The flap lifts and, as if it has been waiting for air, a Polaroid sighs out and falls into my palm. A newborn blur of cheeks and cotton cap, mouth open in a perfect howl. Left corner. In my cramped 17-year-old handwriting, 11E11. My fingers loosen. The small locker key I keep on a cheap chain slips, skips off the porch board, and rings off the step with a clean, accusing king. The sound is so pure, it might as well be a metronome, marking the second before and the second after. Noah bends instinctively, but I'm faster, kneeling to scoop the key into my fist. My knuckles are pale against the brass. Got it, I say, my voice thin. I tuck the Polaroid back into the envelope and flatten the flap. I am careful. Too careful. As if he could read the ink through paper. Sorry to bother you so early. He pulls the suitcase up one more step. Breath flaring. Young lungs, young impatience. I just wanted to say hi. I'm across the stoop. Number 4. I nod. I'm 2. I can feel the thump of my pulse in my ears. On the bench, the old tape spins uselessly under a rubber capstan. I should stop it, but I don't. It gives me something to pretend to look at. Mrs. Park's screen door creaks across the alley, and she appears in her robe with a watering can, eyes narrow and thrilled. Aurelia, she sings, like a bell someone forgot to muffle. Meet our new neighbor. From out of state? Imagine. Such a nice young. Good morning, Mrs. Park, Noah calls, easy, polite. She beams and retreats, satisfied she has ceded the story. Her door whispers shut. The alley exhales. Paint, dust, a distant trash truck lifting and setting down. Noah turns his head to look at the unit numbers stenciled half crooked on the door frames. He turns just enough for the sun to catch the back of his ear. In the convex mirror, his profile tilts and stretches, the way all faces do in that cheap glass, and a small dark smudge appears just below the curl of his left ear. A birthmark. The precise, neat shape of a teardrop. There are a lot of birthmarks in the world. There are 100 ways for coincidence to dress up as fate. There are also things I wrote down in a notebook at 3:41 a.m. on a gray November night in 1999, when a nurse said I could hold him for one quick photo, and then not again. Left ear. Teardrop. Breath like a bird's. I wrote it down to make it real. I wrote it down so it would hurt less when they took him. Now the same teardrop, a lifetime later, winks at me from a stranger's ear in my mirror. My vision narrows until the rest of him drops out. The keys, the suitcase, the polite smile. And it's just that mark and the memory of how warm his skull was under my palm. "You okay?" Noah asks. He's close enough now that I can see the almost invisible scar at his hairline, the kind of line a childhood fall leaves and time fades. He shifts the suitcase to his other hand. The squeal stops. The alley seems quieter for its absence. "I'm fine." My voice is steadier than my hands. I set the envelope down, this time face down, and crook my finger at the tape machine, pretending I mean to get back to it. Just mid-job. What kind of job needs that much noise? He gestures at the tangle of cables, the headphones dangling off the knob like a stethoscope. "Court case," I say, "old phone messages." People say things they shouldn't, into machines that never forget. He laughs softly, not unkind. "Guess that's why they call it forensic." Guess so. For a moment, we stand in that bright, rectangular slice of morning, not moving. The air smells like paint and damp wood, and the last of the night's cool. Somewhere a child shouts, and a door slams, and the city remembers itself. My thumb rubs at the number stamped on the key, 17, a habit I've tried to break and never could. 17 is a locker, and a year and a fault line down the middle of my life. He hoists the suitcase, metal teeth clacking. "I'll let you get back to it. If you need anything? Well, I don't know what you need from me, but—" "I have sugar," I say, absurd. "And a decent extension cord." He grins. "Noted." He takes a step backward, careful on the warped plank I still haven't replaced. "Nice to meet you, Aurelia." His name is still hanging in the air when the mirror throws him into my doorway one last time. Left ear. Teardrop. The Polaroid breathes in the envelope like a small animal. My hand closes around the key again until the edges press crescents into my palm. The old tape on the deck finally runs to silence and flaps the tail against the head with a soft, useless thup, thup, thup. I don't look away from the door until it clicks shut behind him. I gave my child away at 17. This morning he dragged a suitcase to my porch, called me neighbor, and smiled with my father's nose. When people ask what silence costs, I usually tell them $120 an hour. That's my current rate as a forensic audio restorer, someone who cleans old tapes, untangles hiss and static, and makes forgotten words speak again. I sit in a small room lined with foam and wires, and I listen for ghosts. But the truth is, I've been paying for silence far longer than anyone's ever paid me for it. 1999. I was 17 when I moved into St. Leon Mercy, home for girls, a squat brick building with blue crosses painted on its windows to make it look kinder than it was. The intake form said, 83 a day, room, board, medical supervision. I stayed 104 days. They gave me a cot, 3 meals, and a curfew. When you multiply that out, it comes to $10,292, the price of being hidden. On the last night, the nurse woke me at 3:41 a.m. and told me the social worker wanted a signature before shift change. The pen leaked. The blue ink spread through the page and onto my wrist. There was no lawyer, no witness. Just a line that said, "I agree to place the child in permanent care." When the papers were done, the nurse smiled too softly and said, "You did the right thing, honey." Her badge clinked against mine when she hugged me. I remember thinking how heavy metal could sound when it pretends to comfort. 6 hours later, someone slipped a cassette into my jacket pocket track, labeled 11:11 a.m. Delivery Room B. It was 4 minutes long, just one cry, high and unbroken. The nurse didn't sign her name. I never saw her again. 2010. For 10 years after that, on the 11th of every month, I mailed 200 to the Mercy Foundation for adoptions. They sent form letters back. "Your generosity keeps us saving lives." By the time I stopped, I'd sent them 24,000, enough to buy a small car, or a year of college, or maybe forgiveness, if forgiveness had a price tag. I told myself it was charity. It was guilt maintenance. a subscription to silence. When you give a child away, you need somewhere to store what's left of you. Mine was a locker at Riverside Storage, Unit 17. Rental fee. $39.99 a month. 25 years, roughly $12,000. Inside. One Polaroid, blurred but recognizable, time-stamped 11/11. One hospital bracelet with the tag INFNT Mail Grant. One cassette tape. The 4-minute cry. The manager once offered a discount if I upgraded to a larger space. I said no. I didn't need more room. I needed the walls to stay the same distance apart, tight enough to keep the past from echoing. I wear the key to locker 17 around my neck. Clients assume it's a pendant. It isn't jewelry. It's proof I once had something worth locking up. Now, I make my living undoing other people's erasures. I sit in a soundproof booth at Cedar Audio Lab, 10 blocks from the river, and drag frequencies like threads through software until secrets appear. A whisper between radio ads. A confession buried under static. A name spoken in the breath between two words. Sound doesn't lie, I tell clients. It just waits. They nod, thinking it's clever marketing. They don't know I'm talking about myself. My days are measured in waveforms. 6, sometimes 14 hours at a stretch. I wear noise-canceling headphones and forget to eat. My world is hum, pulse, voice. And lately, one voice keeps returning. It came from an old city council archive marked Reeves Fundraiser, Nov 1999. A man laughing over clinking glasses, then lowering his tone. If we sign tonight, we've got the house before the election. The timestamp was 11/10/1099, a few hours before I signed my own papers. Coincidence, maybe. But the cadence of the voice. It had the same bureaucratic calm as the administrator who told me adoption was a civic good. I should have deleted it. Instead, I cleaned the track until the words cut clear through the hiss. Each time I loop it, I hear my own pen scratching under the same fluorescent hum. For years I believed in the word mercy. Believed St. Leon's brochures, the smiling babies, the nurses praying. Believed that kindness could be institutionalized, that someone else knew better than a girl who barely knew how to drive. I believed giving up could be an act of love. Now, every time I process an old tape from that year, I hear the hum of their lights, the exact 60 Hz signature unique to the hospital's grid. And I realize it's the same frequency that runs under my own recordings. The same hum. The same silence. 25 years later, I can quantify what the past cost. $10,292 to disappear. $24,000 to pretend disappearance was noble. $12,000 to store the evidence. $46,292 in total. The only interest I've earned is the tremor in my hands when a tape clicks into place. This morning, I heard a new voice through my open door, bright and unguarded. Morning, I'm Noah James, a name that means nothing should mean nothing. But the way he said it carried a note I recognized, a pitch I hadn't heard since the cassette labeled 11. I thought I'd paid enough to keep that sound buried. Turns out, I'd only been renting the quiet. I paid to keep a secret silent. And now the secret has moved in next door, dragging its suitcase across my floorboards, humming the same broken note I once called mercy. I was 17 the morning they let me hold him. 4 minutes, maybe less. The nurse timed it by the clock on the wall, a square thing that ticked loud enough to drown my own heartbeat. The room smelled like antiseptic and something sweetly metallic, the aftertaste of iron and soap that clung to every delivery ward in St. Sain. Leon Mercy. They'd wrapped him in a thin hospital blanket patterned with blue ducks. I remember thinking how the ducks looked like they were swimming away from one another, like nobody had drawn them to meet. His skin was warm against my forearm, damp where his hair stuck to his temple. He didn't cry. He just blinked up, slow and serious, like he was taking stock. The nurse said, "He's a quiet one." That's a blessing. I shook my head. "No," I said, "it's just the pause before the note." Then, without thinking, I started to sing. Summertime, and the livin' is easy. My voice was hoarse from 17 hours of labor, thin as thread, but he turned toward it. His breath hitched on the word baby. See? I whispered. You'll know a song before you know a cry. There, under the fluorescent hum, I caught it. The faint mark behind his left ear, shaped like a raindrop. I traced it with the tip of my pinky. It was so small, I could have convinced myself I imagined it. But I didn't. That little blur of darker skin became the only proof that this moment ever happened. When the nurse cleared her throat, I knew time was up. Just one more minute, I begged. She said, 4 is already generous. I laughed once, sharp, because generosity had never come in whole numbers for girls like me. They wheeled him away, and the sound of the cartwheels rolling over the threshold made something inside me tear, neat as a paper edge. The clock ticked again. The room was bigger without him, and colder. I remember the sting of the antiseptic and how it made my throat ache. Afterwards, they led me to a side hall to freshen up. On the way out, I passed the janitor's cart. Sticking out of the trash bin was a broken convex mirror, one of those cheap round ones they glue onto buses so drivers can see blind spots. The glass was cracked, but when I glanced into it I saw a warped reflection. Half of my own face, half of his, blended together like one of us had been folded inside the other. I asked the janitor if I could have it. He shrugged. If you want garbage, take it. So I did. I tucked that mirror under my arm and carried it out past the mercy gates. That mirror has followed me ever since. It hangs in every place I live, catching light in its wrong curve. I've tried to throw it out 3 times. Once during a move, once after a breakup, once after a nightmare. But every time I find myself fishing it back from the bin. It's ugly, distorted, and I hate the way it makes my face look, like someone else is staring out from under my skin. Still, I can't let it go. Maybe because in that warped glass, for a moment, we were both there. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I sit under it with the lights off and hum the song again, low enough that no one else can hear. I imagine him somewhere, grown, hearing a melody through a wall and pausing without knowing why. 4 minutes. That's how long I was allowed to be someone's mother. Enough to memorize the rhythm of his breath, the curve of his ear, the way his weight settled into the crook of my elbow. When people talk about first loves, I think of that, not the boy I kissed behind the gym or the man who left years later, but the child who never learned my name. I have lived entire decades inside the silence after that song. The things I kept? A convex mirror that lies about the world, a locker key to a secret I paid rent on, and a song that stops mid-line. Everything else, they took when the clock struck 4 minutes. By the 3rd morning, we had already fallen into a rhythm. Me sweeping the stoop, Mrs. Stoop. Park watering her violets and pretending not to supervise, and Noah crouched in front of his door with a screwdriver between his teeth, installing something that blinked red when the sun hit it. Smart doorbell, he said when he caught me watching. Keeps the porch pirates away. I nodded, though there hadn't been a package thief in Cedar Alley since 2009, and that one turned out to be Mrs. Zay, Park's nephew. The air smelled like detergent and damp cement. Somewhere behind us, a radio coughed out an old gospel tune, the kind with claps off beat. The rhythm mixed with the scrape of my broom, the buzz of his drill, an accidental duet. Mrs. Park called from her porch. Be careful with that wiring, young man. This neighborhood's built on size and short circuits. He laughed. Yes, ma'am, she winked at me. You could learn from him, Aurelia. At least he fixes things. I smiled the way you do when you've spent half your life pretending not to bruise. Noah stood, wiped his hands on his jeans, and adjusted a second device beside the doorbell. Small, black, with a microphone mesh too fine for home use. I recognized the brand instantly. I've restored enough audio gear to know a field recorder when I see one. You setting up a podcast? I asked, aiming for lightness. He hesitated, eyes on the lens. Sort of. Just collecting a few neighborhood stories. Stories? Yeah, people forget how interesting they are until someone listens. The way he said listens sent a shiver down the back of my neck, like he'd just quoted one of my own taglines. He stood back to test the angle, the red light blinking steady. Say something, he called. What? Just anything. Need to check the input level. I forced a half laugh. Testing, testing, 1, 2. The light flicked to green. Perfect. I wanted to ask what kind of stories he meant, who'd asked him to record them. But Mrs. Park appeared with her watering can, and the moment collapsed into small talk. Later that afternoon, while sorting mail, I noticed a package on his porch. Thin, square, express labeled. The return address read, Golden Ledger Media. In gold foil so faint it caught light only at the right angle. The logo. A stylized ledger book, edges burning into a film reel. I'd seen it once before. Embossed on a contract from a production company that specialized in true mercy documentaries. The kind that made money from other people's confessions. When he came out to collect it, I tried to sound casual. Golden Ledger? You making a film? He tore the tape with his thumb, careful not to meet my eyes. Not exactly, just helping them scout some material. What kind of material? He shrugged, half smile. Human. Then he disappeared inside, door closing on a breath of cool air that smelled faintly of new electronics and coffee. I stood there a while, letters forgotten in my hand. Behind his curtain, a faint red light pulsed. Recording. Always recording. That evening, the sun fell at a strange angle, sharp enough to sneak through the half-open blinds of my workroom. The light caught the Polaroid on my desk, the one from 11/111, and set the image glowing as if someone had lit a match inside it. For a second I thought I saw movement in the glossy surface, a face, a tilt of a newborn head, the ghost of a teardrop behind an ear. I shifted, and the glare bounced into the old convex mirror hanging above the bench. In that warped reflection, the Polaroid's corner aligned perfectly with the edge of the desk, exactly the same diagonal as the hospital photo had been 25 years ago. The coincidence made my throat tighten. The key around my neck swung and tapped against my collarbone, metal against bone, a rhythm older than my heartbeat. I pressed it flat to quiet it, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the sound. Outside, Noah was talking to someone on the phone, voice half lost in the dusk. Yeah, I got one already, he said. She's interesting. Used to work in sound. My name wasn't spoken, but it didn't have to be. I turned off the lamp, watching his silhouette move behind the thin curtain, and told myself there were hundreds of retired engineers, dozens of women who worked in sound. It didn't have to mean me. But the Polaroid on the table was still glowing, and the mirror still caught his outline in its curve. He said he came to record stories. I started to wonder if he already knew the ending to mine. He came to capture a story, and I was beginning to fear it was my own. The meeting took place on a Saturday afternoon so hot, the plastic folding chairs stuck to the backs of our legs. The Cedar Residents Association had commandeered the community room behind the laundromat, fluorescent tubes flickering, a tray of stale cookies sweating under cling wrap, the smell of lemon disinfectant failing to hide mildew. I'd gone only because Mrs. Park insisted. You can't complain about the neighborhood if you don't show up when they decide its fate, she'd said, handing me a flyer with bold serif optimism. MEET. Councilman Reeves, revitalize Cedar. Hear the plan. Make your voice heard. I remember thinking that line "make your voice heard" was cruelly ironic for a woman who spent her life cleaning other people's voices for evidence. Noah came too, camera hanging from his neck, the red recording light already blinking before the meeting even started. For documentation, he said when I caught his eye. Transparency's important. The first 20 minutes were bureaucratic theater. Zoning maps projected crooked on the wall. Talk of green renewal, reallocation of community assets, and incentives for voluntary relocation. Reeves, tall and varnished, had the kind of smile that stayed in place whether he was speaking or waiting to. When he gestured, the cufflinks on his shirt caught the light like small flashbulbs. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, Cedar is not a dying neighborhood, it's a sleeping one. We're here to wake it up. The room hummed with polite approval. Mrs. Park, front row center, clapped too loudly and called, We're ready to wake, sir. He grinned. That's the spirit. When he asked for questions, Mrs. S. Park leapt in. Some of us are worried about losing our houses. How will the city choose who qualifies for compensation? Reeves spread his hands, benevolent. We'll need voluntary dossiers, basic histories, household income, proof of residency. We're also encouraging testimonials, stories about your time here. Every neighborhood has a soul, and we want to honor that before we rebuild. Noah raised his camera slightly. So you're collecting stories? Reeves laughed. Yes, young man, exactly that. He turned toward me. And I hear we have a professional among us. Mrs. Biss's. Grant, isn't it? Audio work, correct? I nodded once. Restoration. Beautiful, he said, the word too polished to be sincere. Then you know how vital preservation is. Sometimes we have to clean up the past so the future can shine. The crowd murmured. I felt Noah's lens tilt toward me, the red light blinked steady. Reeves flipped a page on his clipboard, then looked up again, tone shifting just slightly, still friendly, but edged. You understand choice, I imagine. When to keep something, when to let it go. That's wisdom, Mrs. Grant. He smiled wider. Sometimes letting go is the loving thing, isn't it? There was a half-second of silence, then a few chuckles, nervous, uncertain, following his cue. My breath caught. Every sound in the room warped. The hum of the fluorescent lights thickened. The scrape of someone's chair leg turned metallic. The words letting go is love crawled through the air like static on tape. He couldn't possibly know. He couldn't. But I saw Noah lower the camera, eyes darting between us, the way someone looks when they recognize a chord they've heard before. My hand went automatically to my throat, to the chain that held the key to locker 17. The metal was hot from the heat in the room. I gripped it until the edges bit into my palm, just to prove I was still there. Still solid. Mrs. Grant? Reeves prompted, still smiling. You agree, I hope? That sometimes surrender is the smartest decision? I wanted to answer, but my mouth wouldn't move. The hum in my ears rose, merged with the faint mechanical whir of Noah's camera. Surrender is the smartest decision. The phrase hit the same place in me the pen had, that night at St. Leon Mercy. Just below the breastbone, where you keep your breath when you're trying not to cry. Mrs. Park, oblivious, clucked. She's shy, councilman. But she's one of our success stories. Worked hard, stayed single, mind of her own. Laughter again. Thinner this time. Reeves inclined his head. We need more brave women like that. Women who understand when to let go. There it was again, the word, let. A permission I never gave. The air felt heavier. I shifted, meaning to stand, but my elbow brushed the small shelf behind me where I'd hung the convex mirror earlier that week, for better light. It had been an impulsive habit, always hanging it somewhere near me, as if it could keep watch when I couldn't. Now the screw gave way. The mirror slid, caught a flash of the projector light, and fell. The crash wasn't loud, just sharp enough to cut through the chatter. The mirror hit the linoleum and splintered clean down one side. Every head turned. Reeves froze mid-gesture. Sorry, I whispered, kneeling to gather the shards. My hands shook. The largest piece showed a distorted half of my face, eyes wide, mouth open. In the reflection, Noah's camera was still filming, red light pulsing like a heartbeat. Reeves chuckled lightly. No harm done, he said, but his gaze lingered. Careful, Mrs. Grant. Mirrors are bad luck when they break. I looked up at him, a shard still in my palm. Depends on what they show, I said. He blinked, not sure whether it was a joke. The meeting stumbled on after that. Questions about parking permits, funding rounds, but I couldn't follow a word. The hum had changed pitch, the air itself seemed to vibrate. When it finally ended, Mrs. Park fussed over the broken glass. You should throw that out, she said. No sense keeping bad luck. But I wrapped the biggest shard in paper towels and slicked it into my bag. The edge had sliced my thumb. A bead of blood smeared across the surface like a red thread in a spectrogram. Outside, the late sun hit the community room window and flared in the fragment I carried. For a second, I saw the reflection of the brass key hanging against my chest and thought of the locker waiting across town, its lock unbroken, its silence intact. Reeves's words replayed, the way damaged tape loops back to its wound. Sometimes letting go is the loving thing. I'd spent half a lifetime paying for the privilege of believing that. Now, walking home with blood drying on my hand and glass clinking in my purse, I realized the phrase wasn't comfort. It was command. I heard it again, low and sharp, slicing clean through the noise in my head. Letting go is love. It rang like a key turning in metal. I heard those words like the blade that unlatched locker. 17. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I didn't want the room to see me. The meeting still echoed inside my skull. The applause, Reeves's voice curling around that one poisonous phrase. Letting go is love. He had said it like scripture. I had believed it like one. I kicked off my shoes, crossed the creaking floor, and pulled the thin chain around my neck until the brass key 117 slid free. It was warm from my skin. The locker at Riverside Storage had waited 25 years. Each month I sent them $39.99 to keep it breathing. I'd never missed a payment, never opened it except to make sure the air inside was still heavy. At 9:47 p.m., I drove there. The parking lot was empty except for a flickering light that made the sign River ID Store GE blink like a dying heartbeat. I slid the key into the lock. For a second it didn't turn, and I thought maybe the universe had decided to save me from myself. Then it gave way with a dry click, like bone cracking. Inside, the smell of cardboard and dust hit me, the smell of all the things people keep but never claim. I knelt, pulled out the small fireproof box, and set it on the floor. Inside were the 3 relics, the Polaroid that had faded to a ghost of pink and blue, the hospital bracelet, plastic stiff and yellowed, the cassette tape labeled 1111, Delivery Room B. I held the cassette up to the security light filtering through the vent. The magnetic ribbon shimmered like a trapped vein of oil. My reflection in the metal latch looked older than I remembered. Gray hair catching the light, skin drawn tight at the corners of my mouth. I slid the tape into my old Sony player. Static filled the air. Then, after a second, the sound I had both prayed for and dreaded. One thin, perfect cry. It wasn't long, maybe 4 seconds, but it filled the whole storage unit, bounced off metal walls, and back into me. My chest seized, the air snagging mid-breath. Then a nurse's voice, faint in the background. "Time's up." I shut it off, but the echo stayed. My throat burned. I sat on the cold floor with the key digging into my palm, and finally the questions came. If I stay silent, who is speaking for me? If the truth makes my son hate me, what will I have left? If I play this tape, can I still call myself a professional? Or will I just be another woman chasing her own ghosts through static? And if I don't, how long will I keep hearing this cry behind every voice I clean? I looked down at my phone. On the screen, the monthly payment reminder glowed blue. St. Leon Mercy Foundation. $200 due tomorrow. I had set it to autopay in 2000 and never touched it again. It had become my tithe, my penance, my hush money to the past. My thumb hovered over the cancel recurring payment option. For a moment, the screen blurred. I couldn't tell if it was sweat or tears. My blood pressure monitor at home had read 160/98 this morning, the red digits pulsing like an accusation. I thought of the producer from Channel 8 waiting for my signature on the new contract. 18,000 for a 6-part restoration series. "We need you sharp," he'd said. "No drama, no distractions." And here I was, in a concrete cell at midnight, trying to exhume a ghost I had personally buried. The cursor blinked. Confirm cancellation? I pressed yes. The phone chimed once, small and final. A strange quiet fell, the kind that isn't absence of sound but the death of permission. I laughed once, short, shaky. "Guess that's it," I whispered. Mercy expired. I took the tape, the photo, and the bracelet, wrapped them in a towel, and carried them to the car. As I drove home, the wind through the cracked window made the cassette rattle in the cup holder, a tiny clatter, steady as a heartbeat. When I reached the house, the first thing I did was set the tape on my work table beside the digital recorder I used for clients. The room smelled like solder and dust. The waveform on my monitor still showed Reeves's voice frozen mid-sentence. I opened a new file, labeled it 11mine 11truth.wave. Then I clicked record and pressed play on the cassette deck. The cry came again, breaking through the hiss. I watched the wave rise, a trembling mountain of sound. When it ended, I whispered into the microphone, "This is my statement." By the time I finished digitizing, the clock read 2. Japtru AM. My pulse was steadier. My lungs felt like they'd been scrubbed raw. I deleted the autopay from my banking app, archived the emails from Saint Zane, Leon, and replaced the chain on my neck with the key turned backward so the teeth faced out, not in. For the first time in years, the house was silent. No hum of equipment, no playback hiss, just my own breath. In that stillness, I realized what I'd done. For 25 years, I'd been letting other people decide which sounds were worth saving. Tonight, I'd chosen my own. I closed the laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark with my hand over the recorder. Outside, Cedar Alley was asleep. Somewhere across the wall, Noah's doorbell camera blinked red, recording a world I hadn't agreed to be part of. Let him record. Let Reeves campaign. Let Mercy collect dust. I'd made my choice. I muted my wallet before someone else could mute my life. For 3 days after the meeting, Cedar Alley went quiet in a way that felt staged, like someone had lowered the master volume on the whole block. Noah stopped saying good morning. Where he used to nod or raise a hand when he passed, now he just kept his eyes on his phone, earbuds buried deep, head tilted toward whatever he was listening to instead of me. By Tuesday, a sheet of paper appeared on his door, laminated and taped at eye level. Recording in progress. Do not disturb. The font was too neat, too deliberate, like he'd printed it for my benefit. Even Mrs. Park went quiet, though not out of kindness. She lingered on her porch, clipping dead petals, pretending not to watch us ignore each other. Every time I caught her eye, she turned away, lips pressed so tight I could almost hear the whisper. She wasn't brave enough to say out loud, "Trouble." Inside my house, the air felt thick. The gash on my thumb from the broken mirror had crusted over, a narrow red seam. When I pressed it against the brass key at my throat, the sting was almost comforting. It proved I hadn't imagined the wound. That night, as I sat at my desk cleaning the 1111 recording, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No greeting, no punctuation. "You sold me cheap too, huh?" For a moment, I thought it was spam. Then the second message arrived. "Everyone has a price. Guess mine was less than $200 a month." I froze. The number wasn't saved, but the phrasing, the rhythm of it felt too close to home. I typed, "Who is this?" No reply. The cursor blinked like a pulse I couldn't control. I turned the phone face down, but the vibration came again. One long buzz, then silence. Through the window, I saw Noah's door lit by a thin slice of blue from his television. Shadows moved across the blinds, his hand, maybe, pacing. The paper sign still hung there, glowing faintly in the porch light. Recording in progress. I wanted to knock, to ask if he was okay, to ask if it was him who'd sent the message, but the words Reeves had said at the meeting were still looping in my head. Letting go is the loving thing. Maybe this was his way of letting go, muting me before I could explain. Wednesday morning, I made okra soup. It was something my grandmother used to cook when she wanted to apologize without saying the words. The broth thickened slow. The smell filled the kitchen, green and warm and full of ghosts. I ladled some into a small container, wrote for the new neighbor on a sticky note, and carried it next door. Noah's porch smelled like coffee and new paint. I set the container down beside the doormat, knocked twice, and waited. No answer. From inside came a muffled burst of sound, voices overlapping, not conversation, but playback. It was my own voice, I realized, caught from somewhere. Sound doesn't lie, it just waits. He'd taken that from the morning we met, the day he'd asked me to test his microphone. My throat tightened. I backed away, pretending I hadn't heard it. Half an hour later, when I checked again through the peephole, the soup was back on my side of the porch. Still warm. The lid bore a thin crescent scratch, like the mark of a fingernail trying to pry it open, then thinking better of it. I carried it to the sink, emptied it into the drain, and washed the container until my hands burned. That evening, the neighborhood held its usual noises. Distant TVs, the hum of the ice truck on the next block, but between Noah's house and mine, there was nothing. Even the crickets stopped at that invisible border. I sat by the window, listening to the silence between us stretch thin and dangerous. I could see the red LED of his doorbell camera glowing steady, pointed straight at my porch. Every few minutes, I caught myself glancing at my phone, half hoping for another message, half terrified one would come. When the clock struck 11, I finally closed my laptop and stood. The house was dark, except for the blue standby light on the recorder. One small dot of waiting. Outside, a wind stirred, carrying the smell of rain that never came. I thought about the tape in my desk drawer, about Reeves's smile, about the key around my neck. I thought about the word cheap and how it could mean price or worth, depending on who said it. Then I turned off the last light. The click of the switch was louder than it should have been. Through the wall, I heard Noah's door shut. A soft, deliberate sound. No slam, no lock turning. Just a clean, quiet click, like someone had pressed mute on the world. The door next door closed so gently, like a sound file gone silent, one tap away from vanishing. It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind of gray that made Cedar Alley feel like an unedited photograph, all smudges and overexposure. The knock came at exactly 3011 p.m. 3 short raps, one long pause, one last tap. Precise. Practiced. When I opened the door, Noah was standing there, shoulders square, expression taut. Beside him stood a woman in a gray suit that fit her like armor. The kind of gray that said, corporate neutrality, professionally indifferent. She carried a slim folio under one arm and a smile that had probably been practiced in elevators. "Mrs. Grant," she said, extending a hand I didn't take. "Piper Sloan. Media Counsel for Golden Ledger Productions. I think you've heard of us?" I looked at Noah. He didn't look back. His eyes were fixed somewhere over my shoulder, on the half-open door behind me, as if the smell of solder and tape were suddenly foreign. "Yes," I said. "You're the ones who sell mercy by the episode." Piper's smile didn't falter. "I prefer to think we document it." I stepped aside. "You might as well come in. The neighbors will talk if you don't." They stood awkwardly in my workshop, surrounded by cables and reels and the soft hum of machines that never really turned off. Piper laid the folio on my table like a communion offering. "We're developing a new series," she began. "Mercy for Sale. It's about the legacy of charitable adoptions and the women who made difficult choices. Noah's story. Your story is central to the pilot." "My story?" I said, lowering myself into the chair opposite. "Funny, I don't remember submitting it." She flipped open a folder, revealing a printed agreement heavy with italics. "You didn't need to. You're a public interest figure in this context. But we'd like your blessing. Your name gives the narrative emotional continuity." She pushed the first page toward me, manicured nail tapping the line marked "Authorization to use likeness and storyline." "You just need to sign here," she said lightly. "It'll make the story more beautiful." I stared at the dotted line, then up at her. "Beautiful for who?" Piper's smile widened, slow as syrup. "For everyone. Closure is beautiful." Noah shifted beside her, jaw tight. "It's not about closure," he muttered. "It's about truth." "Of course," Piper said smoothly, resting a hand on his arm like a mute button. "Truth and beauty." I let out a short laugh. You know, in audio restoration, beauty is usually what ruins the file. When people try to clean the sound too much, they erase what's real. The breath, the crack, the part that proves someone was alive. Noah looked at me then. Sharp, hurt, searching. "You had 25 years to tell me what was real." I swallowed the retort that rose to my throat. Piper, sensing the tension, slid another document from her folder. "We also need this. A simple consent for archival access. The production is collaborating with St. Deses. Leon Mercy. Home to cross-reference records. We understand you once maintained a personal storage locker connected to that institution. My heart clenched before I could stop it. She smoothed the paper on the table. Across the top, bold letters read, Request for access, Storage Unit 17, Riverside Depot. Something inside me snapped clean and silent, the way a cable breaks under pressure but doesn't fall until you touch it. I picked up the sheet, read it once, twice, then folded it neatly in half. Miss Sloane, I said softly, you just touched the only thing no one is allowed to touch. Her smile wavered. It's just a formality. No, I said, setting the paper aside. That key doesn't open for you. It doesn't open for Reeves, or the Foundation, or whatever goddamn sponsor wants to package guilt as redemption. It's mine. Noah exhaled sharply. Then what about me? I turned toward him. He was trembling, not in anger but in some raw mix of betrayal and disbelief. His voice cracked on the next words. If what you're saying is true, if they really bought you off, why hide it? Why hide me? Why stay quiet for 25 years? I stared at him, at the face that mirrored mine down to the stubborn tilt of the mouth. Because, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, they told me letting go was love. And I believed them. He shook his head. That's not love. That's cowardice. The word hit harder than I expected. Cowardice. The kind of word that comes from someone who's never had to choose between shame and survival. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd sat awake replaying his 4-minute cry, about the envelopes of money sent to nowhere, about the way guilt calcifies until you mistake it for faith. But he wasn't ready to hear it. Maybe he never would be. Piper cleared her throat, reclaiming the conversation like a conductor snapping a baton. Mrs. Grant, you don't have to decide right now. But the premiere is in 3 weeks and our legal deadline. I'm not signing. She blinked. I'm sorry, I said. I'm not signing anything with my name on it that lets you tell my story. Not again. Not ever. Her smile froze, the professional kind that cracks only at the edges. You understand, there will be consequences. Your refusal could be interpreted as obstruction. Interpret it however you want, I said. I've been obstructed my whole life. Noah stepped closer, his tone pleading now. Mom! The word fell out of him like it surprised him as much as me. He swallowed. If you don't sign, they'll think you're hiding something. Let them, I said. The truth doesn't need a press release. He stared at me for a long moment, the silence between us vibrating like feedback. Then he turned to Piper. Let's go. Piper hesitated, eyes narrowing as if recalculating strategy. We can't force cooperation, she said smoothly, but we can ensure the record reflects your refusal. I'd advise you to prepare a statement. Otherwise, others will write it for you. I walked them to the door. Noah paused on the threshold, face caught between fury and grief. I just wanted to know where I came from, he said quietly. Not this, not lies, not war. I wanted that too, I said. But the people who sold us mercy don't trade in truth. He looked away, knuckles white on the doorframe. Then maybe I'll find it myself. Maybe you will, I said. Just remember, microphones don't care who bleeds first. He flinched. What's that supposed to mean? That when you start recording, I said, you'd better be ready to hear everything. Even the parts you wish weren't there. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The hum of the fridge filled the silence like static. Then he left, Piper's heels clicking sharp against the pavement, the sound fading into the afternoon until only the wind remained. I stood there for a long time, the unsigned papers still on the table, the edges damp where my palms had sweated. The machines around me whirred softly, reels spinning, as if waiting for a cue that never came. On the desk, the key to locker 17 caught a slant of dying light and glowed faintly, its teeth glinting like a warning. I reached out, pressed it flat to the page, and whispered, "Not this time." Then I tore the agreement clean down the center. Paper doesn't scream when it's ripped. It sighs, a long, tired breath of release. Outside, I heard Noah's car start, engine growling low, then fading down the street. In the echo, I finally understood. They'd all been writing my life for decades. Reeves, the Sisters of Mercy, the reporters, even the guilt that narrated my silence. That ended now. I picked up the folded halves of the contract, fed them one by one into the shredder, and watched them turn to confetti. When the last scrap vanished, I said it aloud, steady and certain, so even the machines would hear. I'm done signing my name so someone else can write my story. The first arrow came wrapped in a screenshot. I woke to the vibration of my phone at 6:12 a.m., an odd hour for farce, and swiped open a notification from the neighborhood group I barely read anymore. Someone had posted a cropped image of my rate sheet, the same PDF I send clients when they ask for estimates. 20W hour. Forensic audio restoration. Under it, a headline in blocky caps and sharpened malice. MRS. Grant sells victims' voices. Price. List inside. The post had a dozen shares by the time I sat up. The comments moved like a slick of oil. Smug, predictable, hungry. Someone wrote, "So she gets paid to erase people?" Another, "Typical profiting Ospain." The poster's account was new. Its avatar a washed-out photograph of a ledger book on fire. The username, Blue Chapel Leaks. That morning, Mrs. Park avoided my stoop like it was covered in wet paint. She caught my eye only once, then looked away, fingers trembling on the watering can handle as if it were a confession. People I'd waved to for 20 years crossed the street when they saw me. The world contracts quickly when rumor becomes narrative. Piper Sloane's people were methodical. They knew how to seed perception. But this wasn't a polished PR hit. This was grassroots rot. Whoever started Blue Chapel Leaks wanted me to smell like money and be judged like a commodity. They'd taken my honest price, cropped it, dropped it into a caption that turned service into sin. I felt stupidly naked. For decades, I'd worked under the assumption that the world of audio was a little hermetic, an offbeat craft where facts mattered more than gossip. Now someone had rendered my livelihood into a slur. I pulled up the comments and the post details. The account had been created 2 weeks earlier and used a VPN that pinged like an old dial tone. The IP trace landed in 3 different places. No help. But the image file contained metadata. A camera model, a timestamp, and a file name that matched an upload log I'd seen once on Piper's old contractor's Dropbox. Coincidence? Maybe. But the pattern felt familiar. A smear, a pause, an offer to help. The same community they'd just destabilized. Within 48 hours, the neighborhood meeting that had once been a chance to chew stale cookies and discuss mildew turned into a referendum on my character. Reeves, as smooth as ever, announced he'd be adding a clause to the revitalization package. Partners and sponsors may be required to disclose prior collaborations for transparency. In plain terms, if you wanted to be eligible for voluntary relocation benefits, you needed to endorse the project and its chosen media partners. Translation: sign with Golden Ledger, or face the risk of being left out when the city wrote checks. Mrs. Park, once my staunchest street-level ally, started bringing up the church renovation when she came by with her scissor-pruned violets. "If they fix Blue Chapel, think of the gatherings," she said one afternoon, voice small. "And the choir. Oh, Aurelia, imagine the choir. It'll bring money, dear. They say Reeves is generous. He'll make sure our names are on the list for relocation if we vote the right way." It was patronage wrapped in a hymn. Privately, I listened to more old tapes. Habit. Obsession. A way to keep my hands busy and my ears honest. The archive I'd been cleaning for the last month, city council recordings, fundraiser snippets, off-the-record calls, started to form a map. Reeves's voice thread through them like a seam. He joked with donors, he mentioned fast-tracking permits, he said things offhand that meant more if you heard them layered over other voices. The recording of him at the 1999 dinner, that sly phrase, "We've got the House before the election," was only the start. That's when I heard the pattern. It's small, the kind of fingerprint only a person who spends their life looking at spectrograms would notice. Under the baseline hum of an old landline, at about 60 Hz, there was a syncopated tick 3 faint tones in an interval. I ran it through a notch filter and then, obsessively, through a narrow-band FFT. The 3 peaks lined up in multiple files. The Reeves fundraiser, a voicemail left at St. Say. Leon, an audio note from a man who'd called a city official. The same frequency pattern, the same cadence. I labeled it pattern A. I ran cross-correlation. The peaks matched. A password? A cue? Or merely the ambient signature of a particular venue's electrical grid? Too mundane to be a clue, and too consistent to be coincidence. I played with the audio-directional microphones. Phase scrubbing. A spectral subtraction tuned to the precise 59. 860 twinner Sir. Hertz band. The noise was stubborn, but the more I dug, the more it disclosed. Buried under the hum, someone's mouth shaped the words, almost swallowed by machinery. Blue Chapel, 1111. Not a whisper, not yet. But a definite enough articulation to make my skin ice over. Blue Chapel, 1111, the Polaroid timestamp, the locker label. My chest tightened as if a hand had clamped over my ribs. I started tracing the leads. Blue Chapel, of course, was the old parish 2 blocks from the river, the one Reeves had promised to restore, should the residents vote in favor of his plan. 1111 was printed on my Polaroid, burned into the corner like an alibi. Could a fundraiser, a religious building, and my own locked box be linked by the same hidden sign-off? The smear campaign continued on social media. New sock accounts surfaced, photographs edited to make me look furtive, short videos of my porch with captions that implied impropriety. My phone buzzed with unknown numbers leaving veiled threats or crude jokes about selling samples. The cost of my profession, $20 an hour, was being framed as a moral price list. It wasn't just a tax. It was concerted narrative shaping. They were careful. They didn't make direct accusations that could be easily sued. They made suggestions, nudges, the kind of implication that spreads faster than a fact because it requires less proof. More worrying was the atmosphere inside the community. Friends who'd once trusted me now hesitated at my name. The coffee shop owner, who used to give me change for a cup, started asking for my cash up front. The hairdresser muttered about bad optics. The choir at Blue Chapel practiced with the sheen of artificial cheerfulness, and when I walked past, the conductor's baton paused mid-motion like a cough interrupted. The campaign's mechanics started to show its seams when I dug into the recording equipment Noah had installed. The doorbell camera was not a consumer piece. It recorded higher bitrate files and streamed to a cloud server with permissions I couldn't access. The second black device, the one with the fine mic mesh, had a brand that catered to location sound recordists on commission. Whoever installed it intended more than door chimes. Noah tried to explain away questions. Transparency, neighborhood history, openness. He said it like a mantra. Piper's team called and asked for an in-person release meeting where they promised I'd shape the narrative. I declined again. The polite phrase used by production companies was always the same. We'd love your cooperation. Polite coercion. So I changed my tactics. If they wanted to sell mercy, let them display the price tag. If they wanted to frame me as a merchant of hush, I would reverse the market. I reached out to 2 people who still answered my calls. Jade Okoye, a local reporter who'd once borrowed a cable and returned it with an extra reel of tape, and Harlow, the owner of a dusty secondhand electronics store who owed me a favor and a place where old gear could be tested for free. I told them what pattern A had uncovered and asked for help analyzing the metadata trail. They came without judgment. Jade with a pen and a relentless curiosity, Harlow with a battered directional mic and a knowing frown. We set up in Harlow's back room, under the hum of fluorescent lights, and ran the archived files against each other. The spectrogram rendered like a cityscape. The 3-note signature appeared again and again, always near the edges of conversations about donations, property, fast-tracking. When we pulled one file, an inter-office voicemail from St. Seam Bull. Leon's administration dated November 10, 1999. The 3 notes aligned exactly, and, beneath it, a low, clipped syllable. 1111. Something in me unclenched. It wasn't proof of guilt. It was a pattern big enough to be a lead. enough to be worked into evidence, into a narrative that belonged to me and not to some smiling producer. They moved next. I found the ad for Reeves's campaign on a municipal bulletin, funds available for collaborative documentation projects. Golden Ledger listed as a partner. The coincidence stack grew into a pile: sponsors, dates, deposit logs, a ledger with a donor line that matched a bank transfer on the day I signed my nursery papers. They thought by shaping perception they could erase the audit trail of how and why decisions were made. But perception can be countered. Recording. True recording, with waveform fidelity and chain of custody, can expose the scaffolding under the theater. I started to plan a counter. Not a lawsuit, not yet. I'm a restorer, not a litigator. My weapon was what I do best: reveal sound. I positioned a directional mic by my kitchen window and aimed it toward the alley where Noah's camera glowed like a sentinel. I set a recorder to a lossless format and engaged a filter that would expose low-frequency artifacts. If Piper's crew was embedding cues, audible or electrical, into recordings to sync narrative, there would be a signature. If Reeves's machine used Blue Chapel as a staging ground, we would find its fingerprint. It felt strange to mount a trap I hadn't told anyone about. There was a small, fierce satisfaction in it. For 25 years, I had let other people's timelines speak for me. Now I would collect the evidence that let me narrate my own moment. The more I worked, the more moral outrage turned into technical patience. I trimmed clicks, drew out breaths, and watched for the three-note motif like a divining rod in the static. Technology, which they used to manufacture reality, could equally be used to dismantle it. There is a kind of delicious cruelty in using their own tools against them. If they wanted to make a market of mercy, I would make a marketplace of truth only. I would sell it at a price no one could refuse. 0. If they sold compassion as currency, I would redistribute it. Free. For everyone. I would put the tapes, the patterns, the spectrograms where people could hear and see them without gatekeepers. If they sell mercy, I will sell truth, at the price of 0 for anyone who wants to listen. It was chance, or something close enough to it that I couldn't tell the difference. I'd been scrubbing the Reeves fundraiser tape again, isolating the hum that pulsed like a heartbeat beneath his laughter. The 3 low tones repeated in sequence: G, C, D, G, too deliberate to be machine noise, too clean to be coincidence. When I looped it, I realized it wasn't just a hum. It was a chime, a church bell. And not just any bell. It carried the same harmonic wobble as the ones that rang every Sunday from Blue Chapel, the neighborhood parish that Reeves had promised to restore. The spectral graph even showed the same 480 Hz overring, a fingerprint of metal worn thin from years of weather. I checked the timestamp on the original file. November 10, 1999, 11:09 p.m., 2 hours before my own signature at St. Leon Mercy. The next morning, I took my field recorder and walked the 11 blocks to the chapel. The street sign read 1111 Avenue, bleached by sun and neglect. The chapel sat crouched between 2 condemned brownstones, its steeple bandaged in scaffolding. A new banner hung across the gate: future home of the Reeves Restoration Project. Mercy renewed. The irony hit like a bad chord. The front door was locked, but the side gate hung loose. I slipped inside. The air smelled of candle soot and plaster. Dust floated in the light that filtered through blue-stained glass, coating the pews like frost. Somewhere deeper, a bell gave a low, accidental clang. A janitor moving equipment maybe, or the wind playing tricks with metal. I followed the sound down a narrow corridor that opened into what had once been the vestry. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling: donation records, hymnals, and files yellowed to sepia. Someone had stamped archive, do not remove, on the side. A small plaque by the door read St. Leon Mercy. Blue Chapel Annex. My heart stuttered. I lifted the lid of the first box. Inside were ledgers bound in cracked leather, each labeled by year. 1990 was near the bottom, its spine almost eaten through. I hauled it onto a table and opened it carefully, the paper sighing with age. Each page listed donors, names, Amounts, notes. Most were small sums. $5, $10, $20, with neat check marks beside them. Then, halfway through the book, a name jumped out in looping blue ink, Councilman D. Reeves, 75,000. And beside it, in a different hand, one chilling annotation, for purchase of delivery equipment. Saint, Leon Partnership. I traced the letters with my fingertip, the ink still faintly raised after 25 years. Delivery equipment, not a donation for pews or hymnals. A purchase tied directly to the maternity wing of the home that had taken my child. My pulse thudded in my ears. I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every page, zooming in on the handwriting, the signature, the note in the margin. Then, with my recorder balanced on the table, I pressed REC and waited. The silence of the chapel was thick, until the bells stirred again. 4 notes, slow and solemn. G, C, D, G. They filled the room like an answer. I adjusted the gain, catching the resonance as it rolled down the corridor. On the waveform, the peaks formed the same pattern I'd seen on the Reeves tape, the same hidden signature under the fundraiser laughter. The bells had been there all along, coded into his corruption like a watermark. When the last note faded, I stopped the recording. My hands were shaking, but for the first time in years my ears felt steady, tuned. Back in the nave, a caretaker appeared, startled to find me there. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I was just listening," I said, pocketing my recorder. "These bells? They've been here since the 90s? He nodded. "Older than that. Got retuned around 99, though. Big donor that year paid for it. Reeves, I think his name was. Retuned? Yeah. Added a motorized striker system. Said it'd make the sound carry farther. You can still hear it half the city away." I thanked him and left before he could ask my name. Outside, the air smelled like rain and iron. Across the street, a new campaign poster fluttered against the chain-link fence. R.E. Eves 2025. Mercy. Restored. I pulled the brass key from around my neck, felt its weight against my skin, and understood what I'd found. All the threads converged here. The bells, the donations, the maternity equipment, the dates. Reeves hadn't just funded the chapel, he'd used it as a front to launder the transactions that kept St. Sanctions. Leon running. The same machinery that turned girls like me into case files and infants into property. The sound that haunted my tapes wasn't random noise. It was the ghost of the chapel's chime proof etched in frequency, impossible to deny once heard. When I got home, I transferred the field recording to my workstation. The waveform pulsed across the screen, clean and bright. I overlaid it with the 1999 fundraiser track. The peaks matched exactly. The same bell, the same pitch, the same night. I looped the clip once, twice, again and again until it filled the room like a heartbeat. This time, though, it didn't make me tremble. It steadied me. I hit save and named the file Blue Chapel Proof. Wave. The next time those bells rang, the whole city would hear them the way I did. Not as a hymn, but as evidence. My hands still shook, but my hearing was sharper than it had ever been. Conspiracies whisper. But the chapel bells, they speak loudly. The plan came together the way all dangerous ideas do, quietly, then all at once. By September, the air in Cedar had shifted. Posters for Reeves's campaign fluttered from telephone poles, each promising renewal in colors too bright for their lies. The fall fair was scheduled for the first Saturday of the month. A civic circus with food trucks, raffle booths, and a temporary stage erected right under the oak tree at the end of the block. Reeves had promised to make a community appearance there to celebrate the spirit of Cedar. Perfect. A crowd, an open mic, and the promise of live sound. That was the battlefield I knew how to fight on. I started with Jade Okoye, the local reporter who had once helped me decode the spectrograms. I found her at the public radio station, editing tape with a pencil between her teeth. "I want to hold a listening exhibit at the fair," I told her. "Open to the public. Short. Harmless looking." She raised an eyebrow. "And Reeves is the guest of honor?" "Exactly." She bit the pencil. "You're going to play him his own words, aren't you?" "Not just words," I said. "Frequencies." Jade grinned. I'm in. Just tell me where to point the mic. Next came Mr. Harlow, the second-hand shop owner with a basement full of forgotten electronics. He didn't even ask questions when I explained what I needed. Lo assistan? Lo assistan? Lo assi boss rung? He muttered, rummaging through shelves. He emerged with a pair of huge walnut-cased vintage speakers, each the size of a tombstone. These'll make God himself tap his foot. Good, I said. He'll be the only one I can't get sued by. He laughed and waved a hand. You can borrow them till kingdom come. Finally, I went to Father Mateo, the young priest assigned to Blue Chapel after years of vacancy. I met him in the courtyard where the reconstruction scaffolding still wrapped the steeple like a bandage. I need your permission to record the bells, I said. And maybe to play them publicly. He looked puzzled. For worship? For truth? His eyes softened in a way that told me he'd seen enough of both. If what you're doing is righteous, he said quietly, you have my blessing. Just don't destroy the steeple doing it. For the next 2 weeks, my house became a sound lab. Cables snaked through rooms like vines. The old mirror on the wall caught flashes of blue from the screen, as if it, too, wanted to listen. The blueprint was simple. The bells of Blue Chapel. Those 4 unmistakable notes, G, C, D, G. The 1999 fundraiser tape where Reeves whispered, if we sign tonight, we'll have the house before the election. A spectrogram projection, big enough for a crowd to see, showing how the harmonic pattern of the bells matched the hum under his voice. Truth not as a speech, but as a frequency map. Jade brought her camera, Harlow, his heavy speakers, Father Mateo his blessing. We set up in my workshop and rehearsed until the walls vibrated. Bring down the compressor, Jade advised. You want his voice to hit harder than the bells. I adjusted the levels. Click. The whisper emerged clearer than breath. Now gate it, Harlow said. Let the silence drop right before the first chime. That'll make them jump. I smiled. You two should start a band. The waveform danced across the screen. First the whisper, then the bells, then the overlapping resonance where the frequencies met. When I overlaid the two, the peaks aligned perfectly around 3.2 kilohertz. The sweet spot where human speech cuts through noise. That's where truth lives, I murmured. Right between noise and clarity. We ran the sequence again and again, refining the timing until it was seamless. The whisper, the pause, the bells. Then I added one final touch, a live microphone feed that would translate the audio into a spectrogram on a large screen behind the booth. When Reeves spoke at the fair, his voice would paint itself across that same band of frequencies, aligning in real time with the ghosts of his past words. It wasn't about accusation. It was demonstration. Let the frequencies convict him. The fair committee gave me a booth at the far end of the lot, between the popcorn stand and the dunk tank. I registered it under the innocuous title Cedar Sound Memory Project. That night, as I checked the playback one last time, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Older, sharper, the key to Locker 17 glinting against my throat. My pulse synced with the soft blink of the record light. I thought of all the years I'd whispered instead of shouted. Of how the world mistakes silence for consent. No more. I loaded the files onto a solid-state drive, labeled it Mercy. Wave. Then I placed it in my pocket next to the Polaroid and the cassette. Saturday dawned with the smell of fried dough and politics. The fairgrounds buzzed with chatter, music, and the scrape of folding chairs. Reeves's banner hung above the main stage. Mercy restored. Vote for renewal. I set up my booth opposite, under a small canopy. Jade checked the camera angles. Harlow tested the speaker cables. Father Mateo arrived in clerical black, offering a brief prayer that sounded more like defiance than faith. We tested the system one last time. The waveform pulsed alive, steady, obedient. Levels are clean, Jade said, watching the meter climb. When you're ready, just hit play. I nodded, palms damp. As the crowd began to gather for Reeves's speech, the air thickened with heat and noise. Children ran past clutching caramel apples. Volunteers passed out pamphlets. Somewhere, A brass band misfired on the national anthem. Reeves stepped onto the stage, microphone gleaming in his hand. He was smiling that same polished smile, the one that never cracked. I stood in the shadow of my booth, finger hovering over the playback key. The first words out of his mouth were almost tender. Cedar has always been a place of mercy, he said, and the speakers around the fair carried his voice like gospel. I waited for the right moment, the lull between sentences. Then, with a single tap, I let the track roll. Through Harlow's vintage speakers, the whisper crept out. If we sign tonight, we'll have the house before the election. Then, silence. Then, the 4 bells, GCD, ringing clear and undeniable. Heads turned. The crowd froze. On the screen behind me, the spectrogram bloomed with color. Reeves's voice and the bells overlapping at 2 kilohertz, painting the same spectral shape across time. The people nearest the booth gasped. Reeves faltered mid-sentence, blinking into the sunlight. We stopped the playback before chaos took over. The murmurs began, low and spreading, like the hum before a storm. Jade was grinning, the camera steady in her hands. You didn't yell, she said. You didn't accuse. No, I said, staring at the waveform still glowing on the monitor. I didn't have to. I wiped the sweat from my palms and unplugged the main feed. I didn't shout, I whispered. I broadcast a frequency. The fairground felt like a film set. Bright banners, balloons trembling in the late sun, children running sticky-fingered between booths. But my tent sat apart, under the sycamores, a rectangle of shadow and cables. The hand-painted sign above it read, Listening Booth. Here Cedar's. True frequency. It sounded innocuous enough. A community art project. No one expected it to bite. By noon the fair was humming. Reeves's stage had been set at the far end, a blue banner behind him, Mercy Restored, Reeves 2025. His team milled around in matching polos, passing out buttons. Across the green, my small booth attracted the curious, the bored teenagers, the skeptical neighbors, the kind of people who can't resist a sign that says, free headphones. Inside, Jade manned the control laptop, eyes flicking between waveforms. Harlow's ancient walnut speakers framed the entrance like sentinels. Behind us, a single folding table held the relics, my cassette deck, the Polaroid, and the spectrogram monitor, its screen pulsing in standby, waiting for sound to give it color. From the stage, Reeves's warm baritone drifted through the PA system, polished, rehearsed, perfectly in key with the afternoon. Our city thrives on renewal, on faith in good men and good work. He was building toward his promise to restore Blue Chapel by Christmas. Exactly what we'd counted on. I handed out the first set of headphones to a pair of college kids who'd stopped for curiosity. Historical soundscape, I said, smiling. Local restoration. They nodded, slipping them on. The track I'd cued began harmlessly. The 4 bells of Blue Chapel, G, C, D, G, ringing clear. Then a pause of 3 seconds, enough for listeners to glance at each other. Then came the voice, slightly grainy, undeniably Reeves. If we sign tonight, we'll have the house before the election. On the spectrogram, the color bands leapt alive. Orange, gold, red, mapping the very frequencies of his words. The pattern was identical to the 1999 file I'd pulled from the city archive. Jade adjusted the gain, and the sound rolled out of the vintage speakers into open air. At first, people thought it was part of Reeves's speech, a glitch or a joke. Then the realization spread. Slow, contagious, as the rhythm of the bells matched the cadence of his campaign jingle, still playing faintly from the main stage. The crowd stilled. Even the carousel seemed to hush. Reeves faltered mid-sentence. From where I stood, I could see him squint toward my booth, one hand shielding his eyes against the light. His mic popped once in the feedback, then died completely. Harlow whispered, "You've got him off balance." I nodded to Jade. Loop the whisper again. Low gain. The 4 bells struck once more, softer this time, followed by Reeves's own words repeating, spectral and damning. If we sign tonight, we'll have the house before the election. A woman near the popcorn stand gasped. Someone murmured, "That's his voice." Phones lifted. Recording. Reeves jumped down from the stage, a forced smile fixed on his face, cutting through the crowd like a man wading into water he suddenly realizes is too deep. "Noah," he barked, "find Sloane." And there he was. Noah, pushing through the ring of people, camera still around his neck, expression unreadable. Behind him came Piper Sloane, gray suit crisp, fury already polished into her tone. She pointed at the speaker. "Cut that audio. Now. It's illegally obtained." Before I could answer, Jade stepped forward, press badge flashing in the sun. "This is a public exhibit," she said evenly, "protected under journalistic fair use. And what you're hearing isn't private. It's a municipal recording from 1999. Public domain. Councilman." Laughter nervous, rippling through the listeners. Someone shouted, "Let her finish." Another voice, "Play it again." Reeves's face drained of color. Noah reached me first. His eyes were glassy with disbelief. "Where did you get that tape?" he demanded. His voice cracked like a skipped groove. "You can't just. These are lies." I looked at him gently, almost sadly. From the same place they told me letting go was love. He froze. Recognition flashed, then doubt, then anger. Before he could speak, Piper stepped between us like a blade. "This performance ends now," she said. "You're trespassing on licensed intellectual property and defaming an elected official." Jade raised her phone, recording. "Say that again?" Piper's jaw tightened. "You have no right to distribute those materials." "Then sue me," I said quietly. Reeves pushed past them, sweating through his collar. "Mrs. Grant," he said, voice pitched to the crowd. "This is a misunderstanding. These are old tapes, taken out of context. You're upsetting decent people for attention." "Context?" I echoed. "The context is a maternity ward that sold infants under a charity's name. The context is your $75,000 donation to purchase equipment for deliveries that never made it home." Gasps fluttered across the crowd. Reeves raised his hands like a preacher calming his flock. "You can't prove that." "Can't I?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the Polaroid, the same one that had lived in locker 117 for 25 years. The photo's edges were frayed, but the image was still there. A newborn, a hand, and the faint blur of a woman's sleeve. I held it up to the small document camera perched on the table. The image projected instantly onto the screen behind the spectrogram, magnified to the size of a window. "There," I said, the mark behind his ear, a birthmark shaped like a teardrop. Murmurs rose. People craning to look, whispering to one another. Then, slowly, I turned my head, tucking my hair behind my left ear. The same teardrop birthmark glistened under the harsh white light. A sound moved through the crowd, half gasp, half sigh. Noah stepped back as if struck. The color drained from his face. Piper hissed, "This is exploitation." I met her gaze, steady. "No. This is reclamation." The air seemed to thicken, charged. Even the children had gone still. Reeves tried to speak again, but his words tangled with the next sound, the bells of Blue Chapel ringing from Father Mateo's tower a few blocks away. The same 4 notes, clear and undeniable. G, C, D, G. Each toll matched the pattern on the screen, the one overlapping Reeves's own voice. "Listen," I said, raising my voice just enough to carry. "Every story leaves a frequency. Every lie, a trace. You can delete files, burn paper, bury the truth under donations, but you can't erase resonance." I turned to the crowd, to Noah, to the camera lenses flashing like judgment. Then I said it, clean and final. "I didn't abandon my child. They sold both of us." For a heartbeat there was nothing. No breath, no movement, just the echo of the last bell fading into the heat. Reeves swayed, pallid. Mrs. Park, pale and shaking, whispered, "We thought it was charity." "We thought it was mercy." "Mercy was the merchandise," I said. Phones went up, filming. Voices rose, questions, outrage, the rumble of awakening. Jade kept recording, her eyes wet. Reeves tried to back away, but the crowd closed around him, their whispers turning to accusations. Piper shouted something about legal action, but even her voice drowned beneath the swell. Then, as if on cue, the bells tolled once more, 4 perfect notes, rolling over cedar like thunder. The sound hung there, heavy and righteous. In that ringing silence, I felt 25 years of ghosts lift off my chest. The truth wasn't quiet anymore. I hadn't screamed. I'd broadcast the frequency. And the world was finally listening. That night, when the fairground emptied and the echoes of the bells faded into the city's low hum, I walked home alone. The air was heavy with dust and caramel sugar, and somewhere in the distance, sirens tangled with laughter, the usual soundtrack of Aftermath. My hands still smelled faintly of solder and lemon wipes from the booth. When I reached my porch, the street was quiet. Reeves's banners had been torn down. One fluttered in the gutter like a broken flag. The doorbell camera next door blinked red, recording nothing. I unlocked my door and stepped into stillness. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of its long tension. On the wall, the convex mirror hung cracked, reflecting the room in a fractured fisheye world. For years I'd kept it there like a punishment proof that every angle was distorted. Tonight, I unhooked it. The screw gave a sigh and the mirror slid into my hands. The crack had spidered across the glass, scattering my reflection into shards. Forehead, cheek, half a mouth. I set it down gently on the floor. In its place, I hung a flat pane of glass I polished myself that afternoon, salvaged from a thrifted picture frame, edges sanded smooth. It caught the light cleanly, without distortion. For the first time, the room looked real. When I stepped back, I could see my own face properly centered. No warping, no halo of guilt, just me. I went to the kitchen, washed my hands, and reached for the pot I'd left simmering since morning. Okra soup? Again. Not as an apology this time, but as a kind of ritual. Something that carries both salt and sweetness, something that forgives by existing. The smell of lemon soap still hung in the air, the floor was slick under my bare feet. Outside, the night wind rattled the blinds like soft applause. I filled a bowl, covered it, and carried it to the porch. The world seemed to hold its breath as I set it down in front of Noah's door. No note, no explanation, just warmth in a container. I turned to leave. Behind me, a door creaked. "Noah," I said without turning. He stood there barefoot, eyes red-rimmed, hair tousled. The porch light painted him gold and tired. Between us sat the bowl of soup, steam curling like a fragile signal. He cleared his throat. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. Silence again. The kind that feels like 2 frequencies almost syncing. Then, quietly, "You could have told me sooner." "I didn't know how," I said. "They took the language with the papers." He nodded, gaze fixed on the bowl. "People online, they're saying things. About you. About me. About the chapel. They'll keep talking until the next scandal," I said. Sound fades. Truth doesn't. He exhaled, long and shaky. Then, almost to himself, "You really kept that tape?" "I kept all of them." He smiled, a tiny, exhausted curve. "You're relentless." "It's hereditary," I said. That earned a real laugh, cracked but honest. He bent, picked up the bowl, and hesitated. "This is okra, family recipe. Don't add sugar." He nodded. Then, after a beat, "Can I ask something?" I waited. His voice softened. "The song, the one you said you sang." I blinked. "Summertime." He nodded again, not looking at me. "Can you tell me how it goes?" My throat tightened. "You already know the first 4 bars," I said. "You heard them before you cried." He gave a small, broken smile. "Maybe I need to hear them again." We went inside, his living room still half unpacked, boxes stacked like punctuation marks in an unfinished sentence. The table between us was bare, except for 2 spoons. I hummed, soft and steady, the old Gershwin lullaby I'd sung into the sterile air of the hospital 25 years ago. Summertime, and the livin' is easy. Noah sat across from me, shoulders trembling, not from grief anymore, but from recognition. When I reached the fourth line, my voice cracked. He joined in half a whisper, half memory. Your daddy's rich and your mama's good-lookin'. I smiled at that. That part, I said, was wishful thinking. He laughed, rubbing his eyes. We didn't say anything after that. The song had done what it needed to. He dipped his spoon into the soup, took a bite, then gestured for me to do the same. The sound that followed was small, barely there, but it filled the room. 2 spoons clinking against each other on wood. Outside, the night deepened. The last echo of the Blue Chapel bells drifted faintly through the open window, not as judgment now, but as accompaniment. For the first time in 25 years, I wasn't listening for ghosts. I was just listening. And in that quiet kitchen, I heard it. 2 metal spoons touching on a wooden table, the purest frequency of forgiveness. The house sold faster than I expected. Maybe people were drawn to the myth of it, the home of the woman who exposed a councilman. Maybe they just liked the porch light. Either way, when the paperwork cleared, I packed what mattered: my real deck, my notes, the cracked Polaroid, and the melted remains of Key 17. I didn't keep the door, I kept the sound of it closing. The new studio sat at the edge of the river, in what used to be a maritime signal workshop. The walls were thick concrete, the kind that remembered echoes. When I first walked in, it smelled of solder and rain. The wide windows faced east, so every morning the water threw light across the floor like an invitation. I named it True Frequency Studio. On the sign outside, in small serif letters, I added the subtitle, For Women Who Need to Hear Themselves Again. I didn't advertise. They just started showing up. Women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, carrying shoeboxes of cassette tapes, phone voicemails, old letters they wanted to record before the paper dissolved. I taught them how to clean tape heads with cotton swabs, how to balance hiss with silence, how to leave space between words. Silence isn't absence, I told them. It's the frame that makes the sound honest. When someone asked about the origin of the studio, I just said, it started with one tape that was never meant to be heard. Every item that had once been an anchor found new shape. The convex mirror, once cracked, had been replaced by a flat glass panel. Its surface clear, its reflection steady. It hung near the mixing board now, so my students could see themselves without distortion. The Key 17 no longer hung cold around my neck. I'd taken it to a jeweler downtown, who melted the brass and cast it into a pendant shaped like a teardrop. When the light hit it, it shimmered faintly, like a frequency just outside human hearing. And the Polaroid. The faded photo of the newborn with the teardrop mark was no longer hidden in a locker or file. I placed it inside a small light box, the kind used to view film negatives. The bulb glowed from behind, washing the image in gentle white. For the first time, the photo didn't absorb light, it gave it. By mid-autumn, the studio had its own hum. Laughter mixed with static. Sometimes the women cried softly into their microphones, then hit stop, wiped their eyes, and said, again. The river outside kept a low rhythm, a bass note beneath everything we recorded. I built a shelf labeled Recovered Frequencies. Each student added a single sound file, something they'd restored, something they wanted to leave for others. Some were lullabies. Some were answering machine messages from people long gone. One was just a woman saying, I forgive you, in the exact tone she never managed while he was alive. We played those files at the end of every session, lights dimmed, river glinting beyond the window. For the first time, I didn't feel like a witness to pain. I felt like an engineer of clarity. On a soft November morning, Noah arrived. He looked older, calmer. The camera hung loose around his neck now, not like a weapon but like an extra limb. He stepped into the studio, took in the clean lines, the smell of ozone and lemon oil. This place suits you, he said. It listens better than the old one, I said. He smiled. I'm cutting Mercy for Sale, episode 10. Then, after a pause, but this time, it's our version. He set his recorder on the table. No Reeves, no Piper, Just the real story, how sound survives what people try to bury. He looked at me unsure. Would you help me finish it? I nodded. Only if I get final edit. He laughed. Deal. We sat side by side at the console, the hum of the river syncing with the soft whir of the reels. On the monitor, his waveform grew with each sentence. He spoke slowly, measured. No script, no PR polish. In 1999, he said, someone told my mother that mercy meant silence. 25 years later, she proved, mercy has a sound. When he finished, he turned to me. What do you want to keep in? I thought about it. The years of missing time, the interviews, the noise, the tears between edits. Then I said, keep the breath between the two words, I'm sorry. That's where the truth lives. He nodded, marking the spot on the timeline. The monitor light washed over both of us, painting our faces in the same shade of blue. Outside, the church bells rang from far upriver faint, but still the same notes. G, C, D. Only now, they didn't sound like accusation. They sounded like completion. When he left, I stayed behind, tidying cables, labeling new folders. The studio lights dimmed to a low amber. I could see the reflection of the river moving across the wall, liquid and alive. I stood before the lightbox and touched the edge of the Polaroid. The newborn face inside seemed to glow warmer than before, as if the photo itself had exhaled. For 25 years, I'd been the woman who kept the tapes locked, who curated silence for others and called it work. Now I was the one pressing play. Not for confession, but for continuation. When the last student of the evening left, I turned off the machines one by one. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. On my desk lay the pendant, the Polaroid, and a fresh reel labeled Lesson 1, Finding Your Own Frequency. I hung the pendant around my neck, turned off the final switch, and listened to the river hum through the open window. It wasn't haunting anymore. It was harmony. I smiled, whispering to the empty studio, I'm not living in anyone else's control room anymore. Then I hit record for myself, this time, because I no longer live in someone else's studio. I build my own sound. I look straight into the camera lens. No more studio lights, no more host voice. Just me, the microphone, and enough silence to hear my heartbeat. I spoke softly, as if I were sending a message to someone on the other end of the line. If one day, the person knocking on your door has a face you once had to forget, open the door. Not to forgive quickly, but to listen clearly. The silence that followed that sentence was longer than I expected, but I left it as is. Any apprentice knows, don't cut real silence. It's part of the recording. I told the true frequency audience, the people who had followed me through my entire journey of breaking down. That now, I no longer spoke for anyone. I just turned on the mic so they could hear themselves. Someone brought a file recording of an argument with their deceased mother. Someone brought an old tape of their husband laughing. One girl just sent a sigh and said, "This is my last attempt to apologize to someone who didn't listen." I listened to it all, without judgment, without editing. We didn't heal, we just fixed the distortion. Then I asked, as if asking myself, if you had a tape of yourself at 17, which lines would you want to keep? The question hung in the air, without an immediate answer. Some in the audience might cry, some might turn it off. I understand. Not everyone is ready to listen to themselves at an age where they hadn't yet chosen. I smiled, looking out the studio window. The black river flowed slowly, reflecting the green light of the true frequency sign. I said, if you ever have someone force you to mute, don't be afraid of the play button. Because each of us is an unfinished recording, and no one has the right to mix your life according to their script. I paused, took a deep breath. On the table, the teardrop pendant shimmered like a wave. Jade stood behind the camera and signaled, 10 seconds left. I looked into the lens, tilting my head slightly, as if speaking directly to the viewer through the screen. Share this story, if it touches a frequency you've forgotten. Comment on the quote that resonates most with you. And if you want, subscribe to the channel True Frequencies, where we replay the sounds the world once silenced. I smiled. I pressed play. And for the first time, my voice was not overlaid with music.